Millionaire marries a stranger to please his terminally ill grandmother, but the way she treats her leaves him shocked. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Thank you very much. The ballroom smelled faintly of roses and champagne. Golden chandeliers lit up the marble floor, their glow catching on the silver hair of the elderly woman seated at the head table. Eleanor Whitmore, the matriarch of the Whitmore fortune, was turning 85. Her doctors had said she might not see another Christmas. And yet tonight, she smiled for the cameras, holding her champagne flute steady, as if the illness in her bones could be willed into silence. At her side stood Damian Whitmore, tall, sharply dressed, expression unreadable. He was the only grandson, the heir to billions, the one everyone whispered about. But Damian's jaw tightened as the evening dragged on. He knew the terms of the will: married before grandma passes, or everything reverts to the foundation. He had never cared for the fortune. But watching Eleanor's hands tremble as she lifted her glass, that was different. He tapped the microphone. The room fell silent. "I have an announcement," he said, voice carrying across the ballroom. "I'm getting married." A wave of gasps rolled through the crowd. Eleanor's eyes widened, and from the corner of the room, a woman in a simple navy dress looked up, startled. She hadn't even known she was part of this plan. Her name was Ava Reed. She worked at St. Mary's Hospital, mostly in geriatrics. She was here tonight because one of the Whitmore family's assistants had begged her to come. Something about meeting Grandma and helping with a surprise. The surprise, apparently, was this. Ava's first instinct was to walk right out. This wasn't her world: the crystal glasses, the hushed judgment from women in sequined gowns, the cameras waiting for a reaction. But then she saw Eleanor. The old woman's eyes weren't cold like the rest. They were searching, hopeful. Before Ava knew it, Damian was beside her. "Play along," he murmured under his breath. "Just for tonight." She didn't answer. But when Eleanor motioned for her to come closer, Ava's feet moved on their own. The air felt thick. Damian introduced her as his fiancée. The word felt foreign in Ava's ears, like a song she'd never learned. But Eleanor's face lit up a real smile, not the practiced social one from earlier. Ava knelt slightly to greet her, instinctively taking Eleanor's frail hands in hers. "It's so nice to finally meet you," she said softly. Eleanor squeezed back. "My dear, you're exactly what I hoped for." From across the room, Damian watched, and something in his chest shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't supposed to matter. She was supposed to be just a name, a face to pacify a sick grandmother, nothing more. But the way Ava looked at Eleanor, it wasn't pity, it was genuine warmth. "Before we go further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? City and country. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Now, let's get back to our main character." The rest of the evening blurred in and out toasts, polite laughter, clinking glasses. Ava stayed close to Eleanor, helping her cut the cake, making sure her shawl didn't slip from her shoulders. It wasn't loud, dramatic care. It was quiet, constant, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Damian was looking, and for the first time in years, he realized he had no idea what his grandmother's laugh sounded like. Until Ava made her laugh twice in 5 minutes. He found himself wondering, who was this woman, really? And why did it bother him so much that she was making Eleanor happier than he ever had? At that thought, his grip on his champagne glass tightened, and he knew this arrangement wasn't going to stay simple for long. Damian didn't sleep much that night. Not because of the party, he'd been to hundreds of them. It was the image of Ava, standing by his grandmother's chair, tucking the shawl around her shoulders, laughing softly at something Eleanor said. It bothered him. It shouldn't, but it did. The next morning, he found Ava in the kitchen of the Whitmore estate. The kitchen was bigger than most apartments: granite counters, floor-to-ceiling windows, a chef's island stocked with pastries no one touched. She was making tea, not from the imported blends in the cabinet, but from a small jar of loose chamomile she'd brought herself. "You're still here," Damian said, voice edged with surprise. Ava glanced over her shoulder. "Your grandmother asked me to stay. She's having a rough morning." He stepped closer. "You do realize last night wasn't real?" Ava turned fully to face him. Of course. But she doesn't need to be reminded of that every second, does she? There was no malice in her tone, just a calm certainty that made Damian feel small. Before he could respond, Eleanor's voice called from the other room. "Damian, dear, bring Ava in here, would you?" They found Eleanor sitting up in a plush armchair, a wool blanket over her legs. Morning light spilled through the tall windows, catching the silver in her hair. "I was hoping you two might join me for breakfast," she said. Ava smiled and moved to help her adjust the blanket. Damian watched again the gentleness in her hands, the way she lowered herself so she could look Eleanor in the eye instead of towering over her. Halfway through breakfast, Eleanor reached for Ava's hand. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago," she said. Damian raised a brow. "Who?" Eleanor's eyes softened. "The woman who taught me what it meant to truly love someone. She was a nurse, too." "Also when—" Ava's face warmed, but she didn't reply. After breakfast, Damian walked her to the front door. "You don't have to keep this up," he said quietly. Ava shrugged. "I'm not keeping anything up, I'm just being here." Damian didn't know why that irritated him. Maybe because it sounded too genuine. Later that afternoon, Eleanor had a doctor's appointment downtown. Damian insisted on driving, and Ava came along. The clinic lobby smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. Eleanor chatted with Ava the entire way there, barely addressing Damian. He told himself it didn't matter. After the checkup, the doctor pulled Damian aside. "She's stable for now," he said. "But the next few months will be important. Keep her stress low. Make her happy." Make her happy. That was what this whole marriage was supposed to do, wasn't it? On the drive back, Eleanor asked if they could stop by a park. It was a mild spring day, and the cherry blossoms were in bloom. Ava wheeled Eleanor along the paved path, stopping every few feet so she could admire the flowers. Damian followed a few steps behind, hands in his pockets. At one point, Eleanor pointed to a small gazebo. "I used to come here with my husband when we were young," she said. "We'd sit for hours, just watching the blossoms fall." Ava smiled. "Would you like to sit there now?" Eleanor nodded, and they made their way over. As they settled, a breeze carried petals across Eleanor's lap. Ava brushed them away gently, and Eleanor's eyes shimmered. "You're very good with her," Damian said quietly when Ava stepped aside to fetch water. Ava looked at him, not smiling. "She's easy to be good with. She listens." The words landed heavier than he expected. He wasn't used to being told he didn't listen, but maybe she was right. Back at the estate, a small crisis unfolded. One of the house staff had misplaced Eleanor's photo album, the one with decades of family pictures. Damian ordered everyone to search. Ava, however, simply walked to the study, opened the bottom drawer of the desk, and pulled it out. "She told me she keeps it here," Ava said simply, handing it to Eleanor. The relief on Eleanor's face was immediate. She clutched the album to her chest, whispering thanks. Damian stood there, feeling like an outsider in his own home. That evening, as the sun set behind the sprawling gardens, Damian found himself on the balcony outside his office. He could hear laughter drifting from the sitting room, Eleanor's laughter, rich and warm. He leaned against the railing, trying to shake off the feeling creeping into his chest. This was supposed to be a contract, a performance. But every time Ava walked into the room, it felt less like an act, and more like something real. And that realization scared him more than he wanted to admit. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Every morning, Ava would arrive at the Whitmore estate, carrying that same small jar of chamomile tea. Every evening, Damian would find his grandmother in better spirits than he'd seen in years. But it wasn't all soft sunlight and laughter. On Thursday, the Whitmore family charity gala loomed, an annual event Eleanor never missed. Even now, Damian had planned to keep Ava in the background, quiet, unnoticed. That plan didn't survive the first hour. The gala was held in the downtown Marriott ballroom, all glass chandeliers and polished oak floors. Men in tuxedos, women in evening gowns, waiters weaving between them with trays of champagne. Damian stood with a cluster of investors when the first ripple of whispers moved through the room. He followed their eyes and saw Ava. She was across the ballroom, helping Eleanor navigate the crowd, one hand lightly on the old woman's arm. She wasn't wearing anything flashy, just a deep green dress that somehow made every head turn. It wasn't the dress. It was the way she smiled at Eleanor like they were the only two people in the room. "Is that Damian's fiancée?" someone murmured behind him. "She's not what I expected," another voice said. Damian's jaw tightened. He hated the way they said it, like she was a charity case he'd picked up on a whim. Halfway through the evening, a photographer approached for a picture. Damian moved to stand beside his grandmother, but Eleanor waved him aside. "Let Ava be next to me," she said. The flash went off Eleanor, holding Ava's hand, both of them laughing. And for the first time, Damian noticed that his grandmother's cheeks looked less pale. Later, during dinner, a real test came. One of the board members, a man named Carlton Hayes, leaned across the table toward Ava. "So, Miss Reed," he said with a smile that wasn't friendly, "tell me, how does someone from your background end up here?" The table went quiet. Eleanor's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Ava didn't flinch. She set down her glass and met his eyes. "I work with people who don't have much time left. They teach you to care about the moments that matter, not the ones you can put on a resume." A faint murmur went around the table. Carlton looked like he'd bitten into something sour. Damian found himself fighting a smile. After dinner, he stepped onto the balcony to get some air. Ava joined him a moment later. "You didn't have to say that," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but I meant it." The city lights spread out below them, the hum of traffic rising up from the streets. For a moment, Damian almost forgot why they were here, why any of this had started. Inside, the band began to play something slow. Through the glass doors, he could see Eleanor watching them from her table, a small, knowing smile on her face. "Dance with me," Ava said suddenly. He hesitated. "Here?" "No," she said with a faint laugh. "Inside, just once for her." So he did. And when he spun her under the warm light of the chandeliers, he caught Eleanor's expression, the kind that made him wonder if she saw more than she let on. By the time the gala ended, Damian realized he hadn't thought about the will or the inheritance all night. He'd just been there. But reality had a way of crashing back in. The next morning, a headline appeared online. "Who is Damian Whitmore's mystery bride?" Sources claim it's all for show. The article was full of speculation, grainy photos from the gala, and quotes from anonymous insiders saying the relationship was fake. Damian slammed his phone down. He'd been expecting gossip eventually, but not this soon and not with this much detail. When Ava arrived that afternoon, she already knew. "I've dealt with worse," she said lightly. But he could see the tension in her shoulders. Eleanor, however, looked worried. "Damian," she said softly, "don't let them hurt her." Something in the way she said it made his chest tighten. That evening, Damian stood outside Ava's apartment, unsure why he'd driven there at all. She answered in jeans and a loose sweater, hair pulled back. "You could have called," she said. "I didn't want to," he admitted. They talked for a while about nothing important. But when he left, he found himself thinking that the line between pretend and real was getting dangerously thin. And the more time he spent with her, the less he wanted that line to exist at all. 2 days after the gala, the media storm hadn't slowed down. If anything, it had gotten worse. Tabloids loved a scandal, and this one was perfect for them. A billionaire heir, a mysterious nobody fiancé, and a dying grandmother at the center. Every clickbait headline was a little sharper than the last. Damian sat in his office, scrolling through the endless articles, each more ridiculous than the one before. One claimed Ava was after a movie deal. Another suggested she'd been paid a lump sum to play the role. His phone buzzed. A message from his grandmother's nurse. "Ava's here. They're out in the garden." Damian set the phone down and went to the window. From his office, he could see them, Ava pushing Eleanor's wheelchair down the brick path, pausing every so often so Eleanor could point out a blooming rose or a bright yellow finch perched on the fence. For a moment, the noise of the world outside the estate felt far away. Then the gate intercom buzzed. The security camera showed a pair of paparazzi trying to talk their way past the guard. Damian cursed under his breath. He was halfway to the garden when he heard it, the sharp click of a camera shutter from somewhere beyond the fence. Ava looked up, startled, when he appeared. "What's going on?" "Inside," he said, more sharply than he intended. Eleanor frowned. "Damian, please," he said, softer this time. "Just for now." They moved back inside, the warmth of the spring air replaced by the cool hush of the sitting room. Ava was quiet, her jaw tight. "They've been at it since this morning," Damian admitted. "Following you, following us." Ava sank onto the couch. "I knew there'd be attention. I didn't think it would feel like this." He hesitated, then sat across from her. I can make it stop. End the arrangement. Tell them it's over. Eleanor's voice cut in from the doorway. And break my heart in the process? Neither of them spoke. That night, over dinner, the tension was heavy. Ava excused herself early. Damian stayed at the table, staring into his untouched glass of wine. The next morning, Ava didn't come by. She didn't answer his texts. By noon, Damian was pacing his office like a caged animal. Finally, he drove to St. Mary's. He found her in the break room, sipping coffee from a paper cup, her scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. "You didn't have to come here," she said, not looking up. "I did," he replied. She sighed. "Damian, this was supposed to be simple. You needed someone to make your grandmother happy. I agreed. But I didn't sign up to have my life torn apart online." He sat down across from her. "I know, and I'm sorry." She looked at him then, and he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, not just from work, but from the constant spotlight she'd been dragged into. Back at the estate that evening, Eleanor asked him quietly, "Do you care for her, Damian?" He didn't answer right away. "Because if you do," Eleanor continued, "you'll stop thinking about what's convenient for you and start thinking about what's safe for her." The words stayed with him long after she'd gone to bed. The next day, he called a press conference. Ava didn't know until she saw it on television in the staff lounge. Damian stood behind a podium, cameras flashing. "I'm here to address the rumors about my engagement," he began. "Ava Reed is not a social climber. She is not here for money or fame. She is here because she cares for my grandmother in a way no one else has. And that's the only thing that matters to me." He didn't expect applause, but there was a small one anyway. When he returned to the estate, Ava was waiting. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes," he said quietly, "I did." Eleanor, watching from her armchair, smiled faintly like she knew this was only the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. And for the first time, Damian wasn't sure he wanted it to end. The press conference didn't make the headlines go away completely, but it changed the tone. For the first time, articles included the words kindness and dedication, instead of just mystery and gold digger. Damian noticed a change in Ava too. She didn't avoid him anymore. She still kept her boundaries, still reminded herself this was temporary, but there was a quiet ease in the way she spoke to him now. One afternoon, he found her in the music room with Eleanor. Ava was sitting at the grand piano, fingers moving over the keys with hesitant grace. Eleanor hummed along to the melody. "You play?" Damian asked from the doorway. Ava looked up, a little embarrassed. "A bit. My mom taught me." Eleanor smiled. "She was just telling me about the little apartment she grew up in, second floor, over a bakery." Damian stepped inside. He'd known her for weeks now, but every new detail about her felt like finding a page from a book he hadn't realized he wanted to read. That evening, the three of them had dinner together in the smaller dining room, the one Eleanor preferred when it was just family. Halfway through the meal, Eleanor set down her fork and said, "I want to take a trip." Damian blinked. "A trip?" "Yes. There's a cabin by the lake we used to visit when you were a boy. I want to see it again." Ava hesitated. "Is that safe?" Eleanor waved her off. "The doctor says I'm stable enough, and I think it would be good for all of us." 2 days later, they were on the road, Damian driving, Ava in the back with Eleanor. The highway stretched out under a pale blue sky, the air heavy with the scent of pine as they got closer to the lake. The cabin was exactly as Damian remembered: weathered wood, a wide porch, and the sound of water lapping gently against the dock. For 3 days, they settled into a slower rhythm. Mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons walking along the shore, evenings by the fireplace, Eleanor telling stories from decades ago while Ava listened with that same focused warmth she gave to everything she did. On the second night, Damian stepped outside to find Ava sitting on the dock alone, her feet dangling above the water. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "It's peaceful here. Makes you think about what matters." He sat beside her, the old wood creaking under their weight. "And what matters to you?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Right now? Making sure your grandmother has as many good days as possible." Something in his chest tightened. He wanted to tell her that she mattered more than he'd expected, more than he was ready for, but the words stayed locked behind his teeth. The next morning, Eleanor had a small scare. She grew dizzy halfway through breakfast and nearly collapsed. Ava was at her side in seconds, guiding her to the couch, checking her pulse with calm, practiced hands. By the time Damian returned from calling the doctor, Eleanor was resting comfortably. But the incident rattled him. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Eleanor spoke quietly. "Damian, I'm not going to be here forever. You know that." He swallowed hard. "Don't talk like that." She smiled sadly. "I just want you to be happy, and I think you know what that means." "Oh." That night, Damian lay awake, the crackle of the fireplace fading into the quiet hum of his thoughts. This had started as a contract, a performance, but somewhere along the way, it had become something real, at least for him, and he couldn't keep pretending otherwise. They returned from the lake cabin 2 days later. Eleanor looked tired, but there was a light in her eyes that Damian hadn't seen in years. Ava stayed by her side the whole way back, occasionally resting her hand over Eleanor's during the drive. Back at the estate, life picked up its usual pace, or at least, it tried to. But Damian couldn't shake the conversation he'd had with his grandmother on the porch. You know what that means. He knew exactly what she'd been implying. The problem was, Ava didn't. The next morning, Damian found her in the library. She was curled up in one of the leather chairs, reading aloud to Eleanor from an old novel. Her voice was calm, unhurried, the kind of tone you use when you don't just want someone to hear the story, but to feel it. Eleanor noticed him in the doorway and smiled. "You should join us." He stepped inside, leaning against the bookshelf. "I didn't know you liked reading to people," he said to Ava. She closed the book softly. "It helps pass the time, and stories make the hours feel fuller." There was a weight to those words that made him think of hospital rooms and beeping machines. He didn't ask. That evening, a storm rolled in heavy rain drumming against the windows, wind rattling the old shutters. The power flickered twice before the backup generator kicked in. Damian found Ava in the kitchen making tea for Eleanor. The warm light of the stove lamp haloed her hair, and for a second he almost forgot to speak. "She's asleep," Ava said before he could ask. "The rain helps her." He leaned against the counter. "Ava, what happens when this is over?" She paused, spoon in hand. "When what's over?" "This," he said quietly, "the arrangement." Her eyes flicked to his, then away. "We go back to our lives. That's what we agreed." "Is that what you want?" She didn't answer right away. "It's what makes sense." He wanted to push, but the look on her face told him not to. The next day, an unexpected visitor arrived, Carlton Hayes, the board member who'd tried to corner Ava at the gala. He'd brought paperwork for Damian to sign, but it was clear that wasn't the only reason he'd come. "I see your fiancée is still here," Carlton said, his tone dripping with implication. Damian's jaw tightened. "She's here because my grandmother wants her here," Carlton smirked. "Just make sure you remember which part is business and which part is theater. Lines tend to blur." "Oh." Ava walked in just in time to hear that last part. She didn't say anything, but Damian caught the flicker in her expression. After Carlton left, she turned to Damian. "Is that what this is to you? Theater?" "No," he said immediately. "Not anymore." She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to believe him. "Then don't make promises you can't keep." That night, Damian stood outside Eleanor's room after she'd gone to sleep. He could hear Ava moving around in the guest room down the hall. For a moment, he almost knocked. Instead, he went back to his office and stared at the contract they'd signed weeks ago, the one spelling out the terms of their arrangement in cold, clinical language. He picked up the pen, crossed out the final date, and wrote one word in its place: indefinite. He wasn't ready to tell her yet, but he knew. This was no longer about fulfilling a will. It was about keeping someone he couldn't imagine losing. The rain finally cleared 2 days later, leaving the estate bathed in the soft gold of late afternoon. Ava was on the back porch with Eleanor, trimming the potted lavender plants while the older woman sipped her tea. Damian watched them from the doorway for a long moment. He'd been carrying the decision around for days now, the weight of it pressing heavier every hour. He couldn't keep it inside much longer. Eleanor spotted him first. "Damian, come join us. It's too nice to be hiding indoors." He stepped out, the wooden boards warm under his shoes. "How are you feeling today?" he asked Eleanor. "Better," she said with a smile. "Thanks to this one," she added, nodding toward Ava. Ava brushed a bit of soil from her hands. "She's exaggerating. I'm not, Eleanor insisted. You've been a gift, Ava. Damian felt his throat tighten. That was the thing this whole arrangement had started as something for Eleanor. But somewhere along the way, Ava had become a gift to him too. Later that evening, Eleanor retired early, leaving Damian and Ava in the kitchen finishing up the dishes. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. He dried the last plate and set it down. Ava, can we talk? She looked at him cautiously. About what? About oos. Her hands stilled in the dishwater. Damian, we agreed. I know what we agreed, he said, stepping closer. And I know I was the one who wanted it that way. But I can't keep pretending this is just an arrangement anymore. Her eyes searched his. What are you saying? I'm saying, he exhaled, feeling the words scrape out of him. Somewhere between that first night at the ballroom and today, I stopped seeing you as a stand-in. You've become the only person I think about when I wake up, the only one who makes this house feel alive again. Ava shook her head slightly, as if to clear it. Damian, you don't mean that. This is just the circumstances. Your grandmother. This isn't about my grandmother, he interrupted, his voice firm but quiet. This is about me, about you. She stepped back, bumping lightly into the counter. And what happens if this is just temporary for me? What if I can't give you what you're asking for? Then I'll take whatever you can give, he said. But I had to tell you. I couldn't keep it inside any longer. The silence between them was thick, filled only by the ticking of the old wall clock. Finally, Ava looked down, her voice almost a whisper. Damian, I care about you too. But I'm scared. I've been in people's lives when they're leaving this world. I know how it feels to lose. And I can't do that to myself again. His chest ached at the rawness in her voice. Then don't think about the ending right now, he said gently. Just be here, with me, today. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't pull away when he took her hand. From the hallway, the soft shuffle of slippers broke the moment. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, leaning lightly on her cane. I'm sorry, she said with a faint smile. I didn't mean to interrupt. Damian started to step back, but Eleanor's gaze stayed on Ava. You make him better, she said simply. Please. Don't run from that. Oh, Ava's eyes softened, and for the first time that night, Damian let himself hope. It happened just after dawn. Damian was in his office, nursing a cup of coffee, when he heard the urgent knock on the door. It was Maria, one of the night staff. It's your grandmother, she said quickly. She's not breathing right. He didn't even remember setting the cup down. He was already running down the hall, his bare feet silent on the carpet. Ava was there ahead of him, kneeling by Eleanor's bed, one hand on her shoulder, the other holding an oxygen mask in place. She woke up gasping. Ava said without looking at him, We need to get her to the hospital. Now. The ride to St. Mary's was a blur of red lights and the sound of Eleanor's shallow breaths. Damian sat in the back with her, gripping her hand, his other hand braced against the seat as if he could somehow steady the entire world. At the ER, a team of nurses swept Eleanor onto a gurney and disappeared through the double doors. Damian moved to follow, but Ava caught his arm. Let them work, she said gently. They sat in the waiting room, side by side, both staring at the same scuffed patch of tile on the floor. Finally, after what felt like hours, a doctor appeared. She's stable for now, he said. Fluid in the lungs, we've started treatment. But this is a reminder. Her condition is fragile. Every day matters. Mo? Damian felt the words like a blow. Every day matters. That had been Ava's philosophy from the beginning, and now it was written in bold across his reality. They were allowed to see her briefly. Eleanor smiled faintly when they entered. I'm not done yet, she whispered, her voice rasping. Ava leaned close. We know, and we're not done with you either. Later, back at the estate, the house felt smaller. As if the walls themselves understood how close they'd come to losing her. Damian found Ava in the garden, sitting on the stone bench Eleanor loved. She scared me, Ava admitted, her voice low. I've seen so many patients like her. I know the signs. He sat beside her. You stayed calm. That's what she needed. Ava looked at him then. And that's what you need too. She's still here. We can't waste that. The next week became a gentle routine. Short walks with Eleanor in the garden. Quiet afternoons with tea and books. Damian rearranged his schedule so he could be home more. One evening, Eleanor asked them both to join her in the small sitting room. "I've been thinking," she began, "about what happens when I'm gone." "Don't," Damian said quickly. She smiled. "I have to. And I want you both to hear this. The best gift you can give me is to stop waiting for the perfect time to live your own lives." Her gaze shifted between them, warm but knowing. "You've already found something worth holding on to. Don't be foolish enough to let it slip away." Ava's cheeks flushed. Damian didn't take his eyes off her. Later that night, after Eleanor had gone to bed, they stood together in the dimly lit hallway. Neither spoke at first. "Damian," Ava said finally, if we really do this, there's no going back." "I don't want to go back," he said simply. She held his gaze for a long moment, and something unspoken passed between them. A promise, maybe, or the beginning of one. The call came late in the afternoon. Damian was in the study. Ava was helping Eleanor with her knitting in the sitting room. Maria, the housekeeper, answered the phone and hurried in. "It's the Whitmore Foundation," she said. "They're holding tonight's board meeting downtown, and they need you their urgent vote on the hospital funding project." Damian frowned. "They couldn't email?" "They want it in person," Maria replied. Damian glanced toward the sitting room. Eleanor had heard. "Go," she told him. "We'll be fine here." Reluctantly, he went upstairs to change. Ava walked him to the door. "Don't let them push you into something you'll regret," she said quietly. He gave her a faint smile. "I won't." The meeting was exactly what he'd expected, a cluster of board members trying to rush through a deal that looked clean on paper but smelled wrong underneath. Carlton Hayes, of course, was leading the charge. "This funding will secure our expansion for the next decade," Carlton declared. "All we need is Whitmore approval." Damian scanned the documents in front of him. "It'll also cut care for terminal patients by 30%, he said flatly. A murmur rippled through the room. "Those patients are a financial drain," Carlton said, his tone sharp. "Sometimes you have to make hard choices for the greater good." Damian thought of Eleanor. He thought of Ava. And the way she'd said every day matters. "No," he said simply. "Not this time." The vote failed without his support. Carlton's glare followed him all the way out of the building. When he got back to the estate that night, the house was dim except for the lamp in Eleanor's room. He found Ava sitting beside the bed, reading softly. Eleanor was asleep, her breathing even. Ava closed the book and looked up. "How'd it go?" "I said no," Damian replied. "Because of people like her. People like you." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "That's not the Damian Whitmore I met in the boardroom. Maybe I'm not him anymore," he said. Before she could answer, raised voices came from the front hall. Damian stepped out to find Carlton Hayes standing in the entryway. Security trying to usher him out. "I came to see the woman who's turned Damian Whitmore into a sentimental fool." Carlton sneered. Damian's fists clenched. "Get out." "Ho." But Carlton looked past him to Ava, who had appeared in the doorway. "You must be very proud of yourself," Carlton said. "How long before you cash in and disappear?" Ava's face went still. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough to recognize a performance," Carlton shot back. That was enough. Damian stepped forward, planting himself between them. "You will not speak to her like that. Ever." Carlton smirked but didn't argue further. He turned on his heel and left, the front door slamming behind him. Damian turned to Ava. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but her eyes were bright with something not tears. Exactly, but the weight of being defended without having to ask. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "Yes," he said, voice steady. "I did. Because this isn't pretend for me. Not anymore." The words hung in the air between them. She didn't reply right away, but she didn't look away either. From down the hall, Eleanor's voice called softly, "Damian? Ava? Come here a moment." They went together, standing at her bedside. Eleanor's gaze moved from one to the other. "I don't know how much time I have left," she said. "But I know this, whatever you two have, it's worth holding on to. Promise me you'll try." Damian looked at Ava. She gave the smallest nod. "We promise," they said together. It happened in the middle of the night. Damian woke to the sound of hurried footsteps outside his door, followed by a knock that was more of a panic-stricken thud. He opened it to find Maria, pale and breathless. "It's your grandmother," she said. She's not waking up." He didn't bother with shoes. By the time he reached Eleanor's room, Ava was already there, leaning over the bed, speaking softly but urgently. "Eleanor, it's Ava. Can you hear me?" She checked the pulse at her neck, then the oxygen tube. Her breathing shallow. "We need the ambulance now." Damian pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed. His voice clipped as he gave the address. He sat on the bed beside Eleanor, taking her hand in both of his. "Stay with me, Grandma," he murmured, his throat tight. "Please." The paramedics arrived within minutes. Damian rode in the back of the ambulance, Ava beside him, monitoring Eleanor with professional focus. The monitor beeped steadily, but each breath looked like it cost Eleanor too much. At St. Mary's, the ER staff moved quickly, wheeling her through a set of swinging doors. "We'll do everything we can," a nurse said before disappearing inside. Damian and Ava were left standing in the cold fluorescent light of the hallway. For a moment, neither spoke. "She's a fighter," Ava said quietly, more to herself than to him. Hours passed in a haze of waiting room coffee and the low murmur of hospital staff. Finally, the doctor emerged. "She's stable, but very weak," he said. "It's time to start preparing for whatever comes next." Damian felt the floor tilt beneath him. He sat heavily in one of the plastic chairs, his hands clasped tight. Ava sat beside him, not touching him, but close enough that he could feel the quiet steadiness she carried. When they were finally allowed in, Eleanor looked impossibly small against the white sheets. Her eyes opened when she heard their footsteps. "There you are," she whispered. Damian managed a smile. "We're here." She looked between them, her gaze softer than ever. "I've had a good life," she said. "And the last few months, the best of it. Because I've seen you smile again, Damian. And I've seen you, Ava, bring light into this house." Ava blinked quickly, her lips pressing together. "Promise me," Eleanor continued, her voice barely audible, "that when I'm gone, you won't waste what you've found." "We promise," Damian said without hesitation. Eleanor gave a faint nod, then closed her eyes, her breathing slow but steady. That night, back at the estate, the silence was heavier than usual. Damian walked Ava to her room, but neither of them made a move to step inside. "I don't know how to do this," Damian admitted. "I don't know how to prepare to lose her, and not lose you too." Ava's voice was soft, but certain. "Then don't think about losing either of us tonight. Think about being here. Tomorrow will take care of itself." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, without thinking, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. In that quiet hallway, with the storm of uncertainty hanging over them, the touch felt like an anchor. Somewhere deep down, Damian knew this was the night things changed for good. The next morning, Damian and Ava returned to St. Mary's before sunrise. The hallways were quiet, the kind of stillness that makes every footstep sound louder. When they reached Eleanor's room, she was awake. Frail, yes, but her eyes were bright, as if she'd been waiting for them. "You came early," she said with a faint smile. "Couldn't stay away," Damian replied, pulling a chair to her bedside. Ava leaned in, checking her vitals with gentle hands. "How's your breathing?" "Better with you here," Eleanor said, her gaze fixed on Ava. Then she shifted her eyes to Damian. "I need to speak with you both, together." Damian felt a knot form in his chest. "We're listening." Eleanor took a shallow breath. "I don't have much time left. And I've been thinking about the future of this family, about the estate, and about the two of you." Ava started to protest. "Eleanor, you don't need to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted softly but firmly. "Damian, for years you've hidden behind work, behind numbers and deals. You've built walls so high that nothing real could get in. But Ava?" She turned to her, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You climbed over them without even knowing it." Ava's eyes glistened. "I wasn't trying to—" "I know," Eleanor said. "That's why it worked." Damian swallowed hard, unsure where this was going. Eleanor's voice wavered, but her words were steady. "I want you two to promise me something. Not because I'm asking, but because you mean it. Promise me you'll keep building this, whatever this is, into something lasting." Damian didn't hesitate. "I promise." Ava's gaze darted between them, uncertainty written all over her face. "Eleanor? I don't know what happens after." You never do, Eleanor interrupted gently. That's why you hold on tight to what you have now. Silence settled over the room for a moment, broken only by the steady beep of the monitor. Then Eleanor reached for their hands, placing them together over the blanket. You already make each other better, she said. That's rare. Don't throw it away. Ava didn't speak, but she didn't pull her hand back either. Damian felt the smallest squeeze from her fingers enough to keep the knot in his chest from tightening further. The nurse came in then, checking Eleanor's vitals. She'll need to rest, the nurse said quietly. They stepped out into the hallway. Damian turned to Ava. She's right, you know. Ava looked away. It's not that simple. Maybe not, he said, but that doesn't make it less true. Before Ava could respond, his phone buzzed a call from the Whitmore Foundation's legal counsel. He let it go to voicemail. Nothing mattered more than this moment. They spent the rest of the day in the hospital, taking turns sitting by Eleanor's bed, reading to her, or simply holding her hand. In the evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the room in amber light, Eleanor opened her eyes again. You two still here? She asked, her voice soft. Where else would we be? Damian replied. Eleanor smiled faintly. Good, then I can rest easy tonight. For Damian, the unspoken meaning was clear. Time was running out, and whatever choices they made now would define everything that came next. It was the third morning in a row Damian and Ava had arrived before sunrise. The hospital corridors were beginning to feel like an extension of their own home, same faces at the nurse's station, same faint scent of antiseptic in the air. But that morning felt different the moment they stepped into Eleanor's room. She was awake, but her breathing was shallow, each inhale an effort. Her skin looked paler, her hands colder when Damian took them in his. Morning, Grandma, he said softly. Her eyes lit up faintly. You two came early again. We wouldn't miss it, Ava replied, setting a fresh vase of flowers on the table by the bed. Eleanor's gaze lingered on the two of them. I don't think I have much time left, she said without preamble. So I need to say this now. Damian's chest tightened. Don't. Let me finish, she said gently. Life is not about avoiding pain. It's about choosing the people you'll go through it with. I've had my share of losses. But the love I found in between, that's what made it all worth it. Her voice wavered, but her eyes were sharp as they shifted to Ava. You've been more than I ever hoped for him. You've been family. Ava's breath caught. Eleanor? Shh, Eleanor said, smiling faintly. Don't argue. Just promise me you'll stay, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Ava hesitated, glancing at Damian. His eyes held hers, steady and certain. I promise, Ava whispered. Eleanor exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing as if that was all she'd been waiting to hear. For the rest of the day, they stayed by her side. The doctors checked in, nurses adjusted medications, but the room remained a quiet island in the middle of the hospital's steady hum. In the late afternoon, Eleanor grew tired and closed her eyes. Damian sat holding her hand, Ava on the other side, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. She's peaceful, Ava murmured. Damian nodded, but he didn't let go of her hand. Not for a second. The sun was setting when Eleanor stirred again. She looked at both of them, a faint smile on her lips. I'm ready, she said. Don't be afraid. Tears burned Damian's eyes. We love you, he managed. I love you too, she whispered. Then her eyes closed for the last time. The monitor let out a single, steady tone. The nurse stepped in quietly, checked her, and nodded with that gentle professionalism that spoke volumes. I'm sorry, she said softly. Damian bowed his head, his grip tightening around Eleanor's hand before finally laying it gently back on the blanket. Ava reached for him without hesitation. He leaned into her, letting the weight of the moment settle between them. They stayed like that for a long time, the hospital fading away, the only sound their quiet breathing and the distant hum of the building. When they finally stepped out into the hallway, the world outside the window was painted in shades of deep orange and gold. Ava slipped her hand into his. He didn't let go. Not contracts, no arrangements, not pretending. Just the two of them and the unshakable truth that they were in this together, now and always. The funeral was held 3 days later. It was a crisp, clear morning, the kind Eleanor always said made the world feel freshly washed. The Whitmore estate grounds were lined with chairs facing a small platform draped in white and lavender. her favorite colors. Damian stood near the front, dressed in a black suit that suddenly felt too tight. Ava was beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She'd been there through every arrangement, every late-night phone call, every moment when he didn't think he could face another decision. The service was simple. Friends, family, and a few longtime staff members spoke. Damian's voice nearly broke as he shared a memory of Eleanor teaching him how to ride a bike on the graveled path behind the gardens. Ava read a poem Eleanor had once quoted to her about love enduring beyond the grave. When it was over, they walked slowly to the family mausoleum. Damian laid a single white rose on the stone, the petals trembling slightly in the morning breeze. "She would have loved this," Ava said softly. "She would have loved you being here," he replied. After the burial, guests drifted back toward the house. Damian stayed behind, lingering until the grounds were nearly empty. Ava stayed with him, silent but steady. That afternoon, the family gathered in the study for the reading of Eleanor's will. The room smelled faintly of leather and old paper, sunlight streaming through the tall windows. The lawyer, a man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses, opened a thick envelope and began. Most of the will was as expected specific bequests to friends, charitable donations, and instructions for the foundation she had helped build. Then he reached the part about the estate. "To my grandson, Damian Whitmore, I leave Whitmore House, its grounds, and all associated properties, on one condition." A hush fell over the room. The lawyer continued, "That he not live in this house alone. It must be a home, not a monument. Should he choose to reside here, he must share it with someone he loves, and who loves him in return." Damian felt several pairs of eyes turned toward him. The lawyer glanced up, then read the final line of that clause. "If this condition is not met, ownership will transfer to the Whitmore Foundation, and the property will be sold." A ripple of whispers moved through the room. Carlton Hayes, seated in the corner, smirked. "Well, that's going to make things interesting." Damian ignored him, his gaze fixed on Ava. She looked stunned, as if the air had been knocked out of her. After the meeting, they stepped into the hallway. Damian could hear the murmur of voices fading behind them. "She planned this," Ava said, almost to herself. "Of course she did," Damian replied. "She always knew what she wanted." Ava folded her arms, her expression guarded. "And now everyone will think—" "They can think whatever they want," he cut in. "I'm not making any decision because of them. This is about us." She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "It feels like a trap." "It's not," he said. "But even if it was, I'd still choose you." Her breath hitched just slightly, but she didn't answer. That night, the estate was quiet again. Damian stood in Eleanor's old sitting room, the fire casting soft shadows on the walls. He could almost hear her voice in his head, "Don't be foolish enough to let it slip away." Ava appeared in the doorway, still in her black dress from the funeral. "I should head home," she said. "This is your home," he replied without hesitation. For a moment, neither moved. Then Ava stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The distance between them wasn't just measured in feet, it was in choices, fears, and everything unspoken. But Damian knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't going to let her walk away. The days after the funeral were strangely quiet. No visitors, no calls from the foundation, just the echo of footsteps in the long hallways and the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the library. Damian tried to keep busy. He worked from the study, checked in with the grounds crew, even reorganized the wine cellar. But Ava was different. She still helped around the house, still cooked dinner, still tended the garden, but she avoided lingering in the same room too long. When they did speak, her eyes often slid away before his could catch them. On the fourth evening, he found her in the sunroom, folding laundry that had long since cooled. The light was fading, shadows stretching across the tiled floor. "We need to talk," Damian said. Ava didn't look up. "About what?" "About why you've been pulling away." She paused, a shirt half folded in her hands. "I'm not pulling away. I'm just giving us space." "We don't need space," he said. "We need to decide what we're doing. The will changes things." "That's exactly it," she cut in. "It changes everything. Now it's not just about us, Damian. It's about property and conditions and what people will say." He stepped closer. "I don't care what they say." "Well, I do," she replied, her voice low but firm. I've worked hard to build a life where no one could claim I was with someone for the wrong reasons. And now, she trailed off, shaking her head. This isn't about the will, he said quietly. This is about you being scared. Her eyes flashed. Of course I'm scared. You think I want to live in a house that will always remind you of losing her? You think I want to commit to something that might not survive the first storm? Then tell me you don't love me, Damian challenged. If that's the truth, I'll let you walk out right now. Ava's hands clenched around the fabric. She didn't speak. That's what I thought, he said softly. The air between them was heavy, charged with all the words neither had said. Finally, Ava set the folded shirt down and took a step back. I need time, she said. Real time. Away from here. Away from you. Damian's jaw tightened, but he nodded. If that's what it takes for you to see what I already know, I'll give it to you. The next morning, she packed a single suitcase. Damian didn't try to stop her. He stood on the front steps as she walked to the waiting cab, the gravel crunching under her heels. She turned once, halfway down the drive. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then she climbed into the cab, and it pulled away, disappearing past the gate. Damian stayed outside long after the sound of the engine had faded. The estate felt larger than ever, and emptier. Inside, in the quiet of Eleanor's sitting room, he found himself staring at the chair where Ava used to read to her. The will's words echoed in his mind. It must be a home, not a monument. And right now, it felt like nothing but a monument. It had been 12 days since Ava left. The estate had never felt so empty. Damian moved through the halls like a man half awake, stopping now and then in rooms where her presence still lingered, the faint scent of her perfume in the library, a coffee mug she'd favored in the kitchen, a scarf she'd forgotten draped over a chair. Work didn't help. Meetings blurred together, emails piled up. Every night he ended up in Eleanor's sitting room, staring at the fire, replaying their last conversation until the words felt like splinters under his skin. On the 13th morning, he woke to the sound of tires on gravel. Damian moved to the window. A yellow cab rolled to a stop at the front steps. The door opened, and Ava stepped out. She was wearing jeans, a light coat, and that same look she'd had the night of the will reading, except now, there was something softer in her eyes. By the time she reached the door, he was already there, pulling it open. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi," he echoed. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she took a breath. I went to my sister's place. I needed space to think, and I realized everything I was afraid of was about what other people would think, not what I actually wanted. Damian's chest tightened. And what do you want? Her gaze didn't waver. You, this, even if the will never existed, even if the estate burned down tomorrow. I don't care about the house. I care about you. He stepped closer, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in days. You don't know how much I needed to hear that. I think I do, she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Then come inside, he said. Not because of a condition, because it's home. They walked together through the foyer. The house, which had felt like a mausoleum since Eleanor's passing, suddenly seemed warmer, like the air itself had shifted. In the sitting room, Damian paused, looking at Eleanor's chair. She'd be happy, he murmured. Ava squeezed his hand. Then let's make sure we keep it that way. They spent the afternoon unpacking her things, filling the silence with easy conversation. That evening, they cooked dinner together, nothing fancy, just pasta and salad, and ate in the kitchen instead of the formal dining room. It felt right. Afterward, they sat in the garden, the autumn air cool against their skin. Ava leaned her head on his shoulder. You know, she said softly, this place, it doesn't feel like a monument anymore. That's because you're here, he replied. She smiled. Guess that makes us even. You're the reason I came back. La. The sky deepened to shades of indigo and gold, the first stars appearing. For the first time in a long while, Damian felt something settle inside him, a certainty that no will, no condition, no outside opinion could touch. They had chosen each other, and that was all that mattered.